Зона — это очень сложная система ловушек, что ли. Но стоит тут появиться людям, как все здесь приходит в движение. Здесь исполнится ваше самое заветное желание. Самое выстраданное.
Yeah, big vibes. Nothing but late Soviet era vibes, I'd say.
Come get some. Come get some.
I mean, look what the vibes did to me, man.
They turned you bisexual. You're not allowed to be bisexual anymore. It's July 4th or July 1st.
That's right. That's right.
July
That was
1st.
last month.
Yeah.
Everybody's straight again. Sorry.
Oh, crap.
Straight Pride month now. Yeah,
it's straight.
It's every
straight
month, really.
Straight disappointment month. The name for it. This is Movie Night Extravaganza. We are on episode 99. Rounding up to this week being the first, anniversary of the first episode of Movie Night Extravaganza. We're really hitting these milestones pretty quickly. We have episode 100 coming up on the 15th. So this is going to be, quite a nice couple weeks. We are, of course, talking about Stalker. I am joined, as always, by Jay Underworld, artist, illustrator, book cover connoisseur, comic book connoisseur, all of the above. How's it going?
Pretty good. I just built this setup that I have. It did not exist this morning, and it's here now. So the work in progress, but there we go.
Word. Yeah, I like it. I like the lighting so far. It's a lot better than when you popped up on Tuesday, I'd say.
Yeah, that was me sitting on the floor with just regular light bulbs.
Yeah.
This is better than that.
It's shown through. Also joined by Conan Neutron, supposedly the host of Protonic Reversal, although, you know, not an episode this week.
My dude, please.
I'm kidding. But, you know, front man for Conan Neutron, The Secret Friends, just got back from a tour.
Did.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about that in the after.
Yeah. No, that's old news now. That was last week. Shot another segment of the music video that friend of the show and former guest though Mark Borchardt is directing today. So that was good. It was hot, but it was good. And I'm gonna go wrap up some nuts and throw them to see if gravity changes, and we'll just see how the show goes. But I love Stalker. This is a great movie. This is one of my favorite Criterion Challenge discoveries, and I like this movie quite a bit. And I'm stoked that we're doing it, and amused that the next one we're doing is Clerks.
Yeah, well, we're doing Clockwork Orange in between those two.
Which is the perfect transition, right?
Yeah,
exactly. What goes in between these two? Oh yeah, Clockwork Orange. But technically speaking, in the canonical movie night extravaganza sequencing, the next one is going to be Clerks. But it's in the same way where we did we did the Suicide Squad and then Portrait of a Lady on Fire in immediate succession. I mean, I'm in.
More in common than you think. No,
I mean, look,
two absolute bangers, though. Let's be honest.
Yeah, they both are badass movies. Yeah, exactly. But yeah,
they both have people on fire.
Yeah.
They both indeed have people on fire. You're correct about that. Yes.
But of course, we're joined by C. Derek Varn, hasn't been on in a while, host of Varn Vlog, and a million other projects going on right now. I'm sure. How's it going?
I'm doing well. I have somehow made a name for myself as one of the people go to talk about Tarkovsky, because I was just talking off air about how I've probably done, in all seriousness, about 12 different podcasts on Tarkovsky. This will be the second or third one I've done on Stalker. So,
well, we did Kurosawa's Ran for This Evolution, and we talked about how this is your favorite movie in the after party for that. So we had to kind of bring you up to the front bench, I guess, and I
mean, I was literally just being thoughtful. Like, I didn't know it was a whole bit or anything like that.
Yeah. No, I think I recently did on a Sectarian Review podcast discussion of nostalgia and mirror, and then I have done podcasts on Andrei Rublev and on Solaris as well. I've done Solaris 4 times. It's like I'm kind of tired of talking about Solaris, honestly. Yeah. So yeah, and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say. And that's it.
All right.
Noted Tarkovsky scholar, Cedar Park.
And of course, joined again by Ian Miller, bassist for Kowloon Wall City and co-host of Rigs of Dad.
What's happening, gentlemen? Thrilled to be here to talk about my favorite movie of all time. I'm hyped.
It's gonna be good. It's the last time you want us for Dead or Alive. That's a very different kind of movie.
Absolutely, yeah. But weird. What do we want to call it? Sci-fi adjacent stuff, transgressive sci-fi. Like, definitely not like your typical genre fare, but I think both go firmly into the what the fuck category.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Hard agree.
This and they both, I think, are movies with that lean heavily on aesthetic. This movie more than really any movie I've seen.
Yeah,
this movie is all vibes.
Hell yes. I mean, that's a lot of Tarkovsky is just, it's about the vibes. Like watching, I mean, I've watched Stalker. This is probably like my 5th or 6th time. I watched it again last night and today in preparation for this. Like, you really like, so this was 70, Derek, when did this come out? 79?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that was 40 some odd years ago. The just the length of the shots, relatively few cuts throughout the entire film, fewer than 100 maybe. I'm just throwing a number out there. Like, it's just bonkers to watch anything made after 2000 and then go back to this that has like 5-minute long takes in it. It's just like, man, it's everything is, and it's just the aesthetic, the look of it and everything. It's just like, it's kind of overwhelming. I haven't quite recovered from watching it again today.
5-minute long, nearly silent takes.
Except for the Foley stuff that's incredibly loud and intrusive and makes you jump when they Foley something in.
And the Foleying's amazing too. Like it's incredible, like what they do and how they distort the sound and it's hypnotic.
Yeah, the sound design is fucking wild. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, so I have a clip of Artemayev, I guess is his last name. He's the guy that did the music and the audio for this. There is an actual 25-minute long. I'm not playing 25 minutes, but there's a 25-minute long video of him on Criterion Channel where he delves into all this stuff. Yeah, so this is him talking about working with Tarkovsky.
К сожалению, мы со всяким мало общались, мы больше общались по работе. И, как мне кажется, был очень закрытый человек. Я-то его застал уже последние, сколько мы, с 72-го года, нет, в 70-м году мы с ним познакомились. А умер он в 89-м или 6-м, да? Вот, да, в 86-м, совершенно верно. Так что период, так сказать, 16 лет и буквально по пальцам можно перечислить, когда мы там собирались в каких-то компаниях у него дома, выпивали там. Но это были наперечет. Мне казалось, что Андрей вообще очень закрытый человек. Мне кажется, у него ближайший друг был вот один, это Солоницын Толя, с которым они были как-то связаны какими-то такими таинственными узами. И, кстати, оба умерли от одной же болезни, очень поразительной. Это такая связь мистическая. И, кстати, вот опять возвращаясь к его странной манере работы с композитором, он не приходил даже на записи, потому что меня совершенно просто выбивало из него все прочее, потому что я, допустим, уверен, что я написал, знаю, что режиссер, единственный человек, кто знает, как должно все сложиться, это режиссер, то есть он все это видит, слышит и может сказать туда и не туда, потому что у него одного в голове есть план всей картины. Когда я говорю, что ж не приходишь на запись, говорит, это же не концерт. Я говорю, ну хорошо. Говорит, а вдруг мне понравится, а когда потом поставим изображение, то будет никуда не годиться. Нет уж, я говорю, лучше поставлю, когда есть, уж там же я буду решать, нужна музыка или нет. То есть до конца я был в подвешенном состоянии. Это было ужасно. Я все эти картины всегда нервозно себя чувствую. Записываю без музыки, много, это несколько смен, 4, 5, 6 даже, 8 даже смен. Потом, значит, неизвестно, будет это, не будет, и все это прочее. Правда, кстати, вот, однажды он пришел на запись, вот он что такое, когда он снимал, начал «Сталкер» делать, в это время он увлекся философией дзен-буддизма очень, и вот ему померанец, я не забыл, как его зовут, только подарил свою диссертацию. Это первая диссертация, докторскую написал, по-моему, не кандидатскую, по дзен-буддизму вообще был в России. Ее, конечно, зарубили, естественно. Но он, вот эту диссертацию, это мне Андрей дал. Я даже за рукой всю ее переписал. У меня есть несколько тетрадей этих. И он мне сам сказал, прочти диссертацию, потому что вот эта картина очень важна, чтобы ты понял Восток-Запад, хотя бы прикоснулся, что это такое. И мы с ним долго беседовали на эту тему. Вроде я так все это понимал. Он как раз говорил, что ему нужна тема, которая, скажем, игралась бы на восточном инструменте, но была бы европейская, как бы такое сочетание структур. Вместе с тем они никогда не эти две реки никогда не сольются. Вот в этом я как-то все это буквально понимал. Значит, и он, видимо, почувствовал, что здесь что-то я что-то не совсем понимаю. И вдруг пошел на запись. Вот тут я тоже разволновался не на шутку. Сам я выписал из Армении одного специалиста, вот такой инструмент есть Стар, но он вообще на Востоке очень известный инструмент. Вот этот, я сейчас, к сожалению, забыл этого исполнителя, он сейчас в Америке и очень знаменитый стал, играет тоже, в Голливуде тоже играет. Вот. Забыл это. И он очень знает вообще хорошо если можно сказать, литературу, религиозную музыку всех народов, да, и, скажем, азербайджанскую, что играется на таре, религиозную, вот эти мугамы, все, потрясающий молодой человек, который был. Вот, читал, почему выбрал, потому что я не знал, что он такой образованный, вообще по части вот так, знания. Просто ноты знал. Многие народные исполнители не знают ноты. Он знал, хорошо знал. Консерваторию кончил там по скрипке, что не знаю. Вот, и я, значит, потом порылся у себя в библиотеке и нашел одну мелодию средневековую Пульхерия Мороза, посвященная Деве Марии. Это одна 14 века, даже 12, кажется. И Андрей показал, говорит, да, это очень подходит. Такая эстетическая, скупая мелодия. И, значит, я сделал инструментовку, вот Тара играет эту мелодию, восточный тембр, кстати. Вот, Андрей слушает, потом меня отзывает в коридор, говорит, слушай, совершенно не туда, абсолютно. Ну, главное, чтобы не слышал музыкальный редактор, никто. Он говорит, я говорю, а что делать, я сейчас не могу переделать. Ну, да, сейчас проведем запись, говорит, я подпишу все документы, скажу, все в порядке, а потом мы сделаем. Так что картину второй раз уже снял, теперь и музыка вторая.
Damn, unbelievable.
Yeah, so they filmed it with one cinematographer. Didn't like how it came out. Ended up like the footage ended up disappearing, and then they had to reshoot it with a second cinematographer.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of haunting. I grabbed clips from it, but there's like kind of a haunting interview with the second cinematographer. It's like the last interview before he dies, and he like right before he dies, like he's clearly like incredibly sick, and he's like telling the story of how all this came together. And you know, it's kind of it's fascinating, I think, because like this is a movie that obviously kind of famously killed Tarkovsky, right? Like he died not so not so long after this.
And other folks did as well, and a lot of it had to do with the where they were filming it. That literally, like, you know, those crazy things where there's like the foamy water. That's actual like poisons, like runoff from like chemical runoff and stuff that actually poisoned people on set, including the director. So kind of a crazy mythos.
But
Thank you.
That's what you get for filming outside of Chernobyl. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, buy the ticket, take the ride, I guess. But you know, and going back and filming, and I mean, there's a lot of like he reshot like the lion's share of the movie, just because there was a thing with the film stock where they developed it wrong and it basically was ruined, and so he just basically reshot like all kinds of stuff. Like it's kind of wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking a bit of Suzuki, the way they have like different film stocks for different parts of the film. Because remember, Tokyo Drifter, where like the beginning shot in black and white.
Oh yeah,
why it was shot in black and white is he had black and white film he wanted to use up before it expired.
Yeah,
and like
very pragmatic. I appreciate it.
Whereas this is just very, very meticulous. Like you know that sepia just gives it such a unique feel. And then whenever you get struck by the color of that valley it was you know, stunning, breathtaking.
It feels a lot like the Wizard of Oz, right? Like the beginning and the end kind of feel like when they go back to Kansas and it's after the Twister has taken shape and it's back to being that like dark sepia tone, and it feels exactly like that same kind of almost like nostalgic but also like confusing and like disorienting feeling.
Yeah, it's like the color, the life, the vitality has been leached out of the image, like almost literally. So I was able to see the recent restoration. I think that Forrest, that you ran the promo, the trailer that you ran was for the restoration that ran at Alamo. That had been 5 or 6 years ago now, and that was absolutely stunning to see that restoration big projected. Like obviously, I just watched it this most recent time on my, you know, pretty decent home system, but man, seeing it big with the, you know, in a theater with people with the sound was something else. I mean, it is I mean, breathtaking sounds corny, but I'll say it again. It's just like a very special experience. It's cool as hell.
That's the key, is with people too. I couldn't even imagine seeing this in a theater. Like I love this movie, but that has to be insane.
Yeah, I imagine people dealing with those beginning shots that are so long. Another thing about this movie, I mean, it's actually more Estonian countryside than it is Russian or
the dog only spoke
Ukrainian,
Estonian. Like the dog only answered to Estonian commands.
Right.
No Estonian dog erasure, please. Thank you.
Yeah, it was filmed mostly in Mardu, which is where there was a couple of abandoned power plants that are key to the film. Actually, that's part of what they're shooting in. I think a lot of it's shot in an abandoned and apparently highly toxic hydroelectric plant. But it's gorgeous, and like And also the stuff they do with camera tricks when you actually look at how few scene changes there are and forced perspective and stuff is kind of astounding. It's something to. It blows your mind when you're like, oh yeah, he's doing this without digital anything. Like this is all old film, forced perspective. It's all classic cinematography, and it's like that actually kind of blows my mind every time I watch this movie. I'm just like, how are they doing this? Like,
Yeah.
There really isn't anything visually quite like it. I mean, there's a few parallels.
Yeah, go on. I was just going to bring up.
I almost got through it.
I was going to bring up Chloe Zhou with
Sure.
Nomadland, which came, strikingly close, and I that's the one thing I praise about that movie is just that the beautiful shots. Although she plays around a little bit with lighting, as opposed to this film, which doesn't really. But that's
there's plenty of stuff to praise about that film, but leftists won't do it, so that's fine. I also want to point out, Andy, it looks like you're about to run your Tight Five at a really cool '80s like comedy store style club. So appreciate that.
We got this fake painted brick wall.
I was gonna let that go unremarked until the plugs, but I can't let it go. It's
no.
But I think the only other parallel I can think of for this sort of era, I Come and See kind of a little bit, but that's a wildly different kind of movie. But just like the utilization of, I mean, the long shots are pragmatic as much as anything else, right? But like they're so pensive and just kind of draw you in to the point that, like, I think in my Letterboxd review I said something like Tarkovsky makes David Lynch look like Michael Bay. And I stand by it. But it's something that I think if folks look, I get it, like it's a lot, and some people are going to be like, I watch movies, late at night. Some people will fall asleep watching it because I totally understand, but I think it's incredibly compelling, and it's incredibly compelling in a way that if you sit down and break down the component elements of, like, it's ostensibly asking the audience to play a giant game of let's pretend. It's kind of astounding because it actually works. It works in a way that you're told certain things, and the way it fits together with a very small group of, for the lion's share of the movie, 3 people playing off each other. I mean, that's like some stage play stuff as far as like theater of the mind, but to have the visuals be like matching up to it is astounding. It's too bad people got poisoned doing it, but anyway. That's
it reminded me a lot of Down by Law.
Sure, yeah.
Which a very similar journey, except not quite as beautiful long shots. And Roberto Benigni, screaming about ice cream.
Yeah, the movie that it reminds me of. I was thinking about Weekend, the Jean-Luc Godard movie. Which is, the entire, like, most of, like, the lion's share of the movie, they're walking through these kind of vignettes, and there's, like, all these random, like, acts of violence going on in the background, but they just keep walking scene by scene throughout the entire movie, and there's stuff like, I mean, it kind of reminded me of when they see the car that has, like, the people in it that originally died in Stalker. Like, it's very similar stuff to that. Like, they keep on walking by car wrecks, and they keep on walking by, like, cannibals, and, like, it's just this insane movie. That movie, I think, had a lot more going on. Like, it was absurdist and more anarchical, I guess, but, like, this movie kind of had the same kind of vibe where, like, they just kept walking, like, you know what I mean? They kept walking through the zone, and, like,
I mean, there's literally an extended scene where they're trying to take a nap, where it's like, wow, this is cinema. Yeah, exactly.
And it's riveting too, but
it's somehow compelling. That's what I'm saying. It's
like sleeping was just so interesting.
They'd be like, hey, you want to watch some dudes trying to fall asleep? No, not really. I don't actually want to do that, but no, it's good.
I don't remember what movie we watched recently where they were talking about how they wanted to get away from the fact that every single scene between characters results in, like, conflict. You know what I mean? Like, like scenes are driven by conflict.
Yeah.
That scene kind of reminded me of that message, because the entire thing is just he's trying to fall asleep, and, like, the writer won't shut the fuck up, and the professor's trying to go to sleep.
Keeps talking. Yeah. It's like getting paid by the word. Literally,
it's the hero's journey. It's basically planes, trains, and automobiles, but just in the Estonian countryside.
Right, exactly.
So, Derek, I'm curious, as the resident Tarkovsky expert, what is his deal with doors? I noticed this time the opening shot of the stalker's home and his family, idyllic family life, shot through a door. I've seen The Sacrifice a couple times. That's like every shot feels like it's through a door. Mirror, tons of this stuff. The doors and water, nostalgia. Like what? Yeah. What are the? Yeah. What's the deal?
What's the deal with the doors?
I gotta throw up the door. I gotta throw up the door background there.
Oh, right. There you go. Fucking
well done. Well done.
There's a couple of things. I mean, one of the things about Tarkovsky that you kind of have to wrap your mind around a little bit is he's both a staunch Orthodox Christian and kind of a communist. Like he's slightly dissident in the Soviet era, but he's not an anti-communist at all. And in fact, one of the things that really shows up in Nostalgia is he's like complaining that like the Soviet world has turned away too much from the rest of the world. And, it's part of his whole point of that book. I mean, that movie. It feels like a book because it's also kind of low key about his dad. The stuff with doors is he is obsessed with framing things iconically, like specifically iconically.
Right.
And doors are a great filmic way to do that. And he's also, if I was, still an academic, I would be writing a paper on like, if like the way that he views liminal spaces, because that's what this whole thing is about. It's the transition.
One big liminal space. You're right. Yeah. The whole movie. Yeah.
Yeah. The transition between things, the way like dividing lines between worlds break down, fall apart. And I see this theme. It's not so much in his early work like Solaris or Rubiliev, but it's very much in the late work. It's also a big thing in Mirror. And in the more surrealistic late movies, one of the things about Stalker's interesting for me because it's like kind of the last movie where Tarkovsky cares that there's a narrative. Like after this, yet the stories have a narrative, but it's like he doesn't care if you understand what that narrative is, like at all. And in the early movies, he kind of does care. Definitely in Ivan's Childhood or Andrei Rublev.
Mirror is a big break, right? There's barely a narrative thread through that one.
Yeah, it's basically like it's almost just autobiographical image play. Like that's pretty much what it is. Nostalgia has more of a narrative than Mirror, but Stalker is kind of the transition movie because it has a clear narrative and it's trying to tell you something. And yeah, it's amazing what it does. I think that calling it like asking you to play make-believe is actually correct. But it's also interesting that it's so focused on visual storytelling that it does not really care if you always understand moment to moment what is actually going on narratively. And particularly once you get to the end of the movie, when the stalker comes back, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Jarring.
Yes.
So yeah, and I think the framing with doors and framing in general, there's so many scenes from mid to late Tarkovsky too, where color contrast is used and design contrast is used, and like these dilapidated, very wet. I mean, he really likes water. Like, I'm always thinking, like, how is he shooting this with old equipment, like standing in 3 feet of water? Like,
it is a wet ass movie.
Yeah.
Man.
And that's true for like all of his movies. They're all wet ass, I guess.
Do they have any puppets in any of his films?
No, there's no wet ass puppets.
Okay.
Wop, wop, wop. That's a wet ass puppet.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think that's what's going on there, and I also think his stuff. Tarkovsky is like, I mean, he's the son of a poet. That's something I think people should probably know about him, and he really loves poetry. But he does not think poetry in film should be. It should be expressive in the way film is expressive, which is visually. And so he often tries to frame things so that the images are iconic. And I don't mean iconic as in memorable. I mean like literally icons. Like they're to encapsulate like certain nodes or important points of transition, and to draw that out to you.
That's awesome. Thank you for breaking it down.
Keep going with it. This doesn't have any audio. Well, it has audio, it has music, but this
actually I could go. I could keep going with framing devices
this is
like
some
that.
of the images of them shooting in water.
Wow. Yeah. So I told you they were shooting in 2 or 3 feet in water.
Miserable.
I'll
Absolutely miserable.
Very slight background music, so that we can keep talking about it. But
yeah, no. Well, one of the things about filming in doorways too also kind of creates a framing for the composition. This is a trick often done in art. Kind of dates back to like the triptychs in the religious artwork. So I could see somebody being very religious, like Tarkovsky was, probably being inspired by kind of that kind of interplay of creating a type of triptych in his film. And it also like divides up the frame differently than whenever you're looking out like in a field.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, it makes sense to me that he was a dude of dogma, because if you think about like the whole speech at the end that the Stalker's giving about the lack of faith and such, so and actually that when I first saw it kind of took me by surprise, because I don't know, I guess I think of like communist era filmmaking, and I just don't think of like a like a getting stoked on theism aspect, but and it doesn't have to be a direct like relationship with God thing. It could be more ambiguous or whatever, but it did kind of pop up out of nowhere for me, and the way that later made sense. No, if you think about what this guy, like this is a guy, like the Stalkers lead the people to the room, but they never enter the room. But then this guy came before and did enter the room, and like nasty stuff happened, right? So obviously there's going to be a certain degree of, if not superstition, belief that's going to be necessary.
I think also though there's a pervasive belief that comes in a lot of late era Soviet stuff, that there's kind of this nobody really believes in anything anymore, right? Like as the Soviet Union falls around them, and like succumbs, and is clearly this like
nobody wants to believe anymore.
Well, it's kind of just clearly like this decrepit empire, right? Like it's burned itself out trying to compete with like the U.S. and they've invaded Afghanistan like the same year, like like all of these different things where this thing is falling apart around them. It starts to be that for the first time it's kind of a belief based system, right? Like communism only really works if everyone communally feels like they're working towards a shared goal, and for that to kind of fall apart around everybody, I think there is like this nihilistic obsession with trying to either spark some kind of spark that feeling like coming back, that collectivist feeling, or to just remark on it and say like everything is fucking stupid, and like I don't want to be here anymore, and like we should all just kind of die, and like there's a lot of like very depressing stuff from this time coming out of the Soviet
Well, sure. I mean, like again, I'm gonna invoke it again. Look, Come and See, which is one of the best movies that it's on a small list. I don't want to rewatch that. Thank you. I'm good. Like it's just too much. It's too heartbreaking. It's too demoralizing. It's too, it's like Dancer in the Dark is in that same category of just like, oh, Requiem for a Dream. I love that film, but I'm like, oh, do I want to go watch it? No, I do not. Thank you.
Well, my thoughts watching this movie specifically is that like that sense of belief has never been intrinsic in the U.S. empire, right? Like, or the U.S. state. Like from the very beginning, that it was clearly not that. So like to have watched this and be like, oh well, all the hope's kind of been drained out of us, and all the belief that the quote
just
that
like the color was drained out of the tone of the beginning and ending parts, right?
Yeah, but it's like once the future was only a continuation of the present, all its changes loom somewhere beyond the horizon. But now the future is part of the present. Are they ready for this? All they want to do is gobble. I don't feel like the U.S. is vibe, or like the U.S. is like economic system was ever based on anything besides that, right? Like we have always been hyper-capitalist. We have always been hyper-individualist. There was never a sense that we are working together towards a shared goal. In fact, the goal is, hey, everybody else in like my town that I live around, like fuck you, I'm gonna get mine and climb up this fucking ladder, and then like shit on you from the top of the ladder. Like so that feeling that's kind of going away from the Stalker at the end of it, where he's like everyone is coming to that. It's like, yeah, well, I've never felt anything like that. This society is based on anything but that. Like,
this is the meme. First time, we get it.
Yeah, no, it's that American exceptionalism sort of flies. I mean, obviously flies right in the face of what the communist mores might have been. But yeah, that's why it hits different for those of us who are brought up in a hyper capitalist state. For sure.
And also in this is, I mean, we're kind of living through the continuation of like Fukuyama's like the end of history, right? Like the collapse of the Soviet Union, and like so that idea that like the future is the present, that is very pervasive right now. Like that is just what it feels like we're going like in the middle of still.
Yeah, man.
It's interesting, you talk about the religious elements of Tarkovsky, but there is something very particular about when he picks scripts. One thing that I would point out to people is that in all his adaptive work, that's particularly science fiction work, he deliberately picks atheist novelists to convert into allegories about religion. And there's two things going on there. One, it's gonna appease the Soviet film industry. Mosfilm's gonna be okay with it, and thus it makes the religious stuff a little bit ambiguous. Whereas if you like in his late films, it's not ambiguous. I mean, even though they barely have a plot, it's not ambiguous at all, because even though he's still working with the Soviet film industry, he's not working in the Soviet Union anymore. You think about like how the hell did you get Andrei Rublev a 3-hour epic that on a religious figure made in the Khrushchev period, when they had to get that script through former Stalinist former Stalinist censors, and how they did that and why he did it is interesting, because even the point of Rublev is in Tarkovsky's world, the Soviet Union, for all its secularism, is doing something like he would say, like the Tatars did to the empire, the Russian Empire, which is they are actually like, he thinks that like they are doing God's work. So another thing he tends to do is to take atheist scripts basically and give them religious connotations to drive that point home, that it doesn't even need to be religious to drive through a religious point. And that's like part of how he selects his scripts. Now, his later films, he pretty much writes his own scripts and doesn't really care about narrative and isn't trying to appease Mosfilm in the same way, but it's there. And it's also, it was generally seen that ambiguity was something the Soviet Union was totally okay with. I mean, they kind of had an ambiguous stance towards religion anyway. For all the suppression of religion that you hear about, they weren't, they were vigorous in it in education, but even during the Stalin period, they were backing away from like, really, really, really cracking down on the Orthodox Church, which they did in the beginning. And to be completely honest, for pretty good reasons. But
that's how the French Revolution got kind of shut down pretty fast with the Thermidorian reaction too, right? Like they went after the churches too hard, and everyone was like, well, maybe this is not what we want to be doing.
Well, that's why they lost the peasantry in the Vendée. And actually, like, just as a side note, the bloodiness of the French Revolution is not in the terror, it's in the Vendée Wars. That's when they were like, the revolutionaries were like having to wipe out whole villages of like Catholic peasants, which of course eventually really hurt your PR.
Not that popular, as it turns out.
Yeah. Similarly, in the Crisero War in Mexico, when the Mexican revolutionaries went and killed all the priests, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm pro killing priests, but like the reasons why they did it weren't out of nowhere.
Well, also like the Parisian like intellectual set was not the same by any stretch of the imagination as like the lumpen proletariat of the peasantry of the like Catholic villages. Like I think it is the disconnect that you just kind of assume both in the French and Russian Revolution, that like, oh well, the peasants are just going to be on board, and then you go out to meet the actual peasants, and they're like, no, like who the fuck are you? Like I've never seen you before. I don't know you. And like this, like the czar, like the king is fine. Like it's this dick landlord that I'm trying to fucking deal with.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, you're right about that. Although what's interesting to get really into the nitty gritty of Soviet history, the peasants were on board in the beginning, actually, like pretty strongly. In fact, the Bolsheviks actually had to change some of their stances, including what the dictatorship of the proletariat was to the dictatorship of the proletariat and peasants, because they actually had outside of Moscow more peasant support than they had proletarian and raw numbers.
Yeah. Well, I've been listening to Revolutions, like the Mike Duncan podcast on the whole thing, and I would like, but they also had like centuries of like the going to the villages kind of thing, right? Where like they couldn't connect to the peasants whatsoever. I think that as like it's clear that like an empire is failing, things kind of change, and your like constituencies change, right? Like people are going to war or whatever, and like peasants are going to war. And they're like, wait a second, like maybe I don't want to come back to this fucking plot of land, and like maybe I want to, you know, figure out what else is out there.
I was actually kind of surprised by some of the religious stuff that was brought into the film because growing up, I was
back on track.
I was actually
Someone got it.
Yeah. Believe it or not, it's going to be me this time.
Yeah, we're as shocked as anyone. Andy, go ahead.
But no, I was raised, hardcore Christian by crazy people, and we were taught that the Soviet Union would kill you if you had a Bible. Right. You know that's so it's kind of fascinating to actually see like, no, you know what, the church lied to you.
Yeah, I mean, and
to do that, I think I don't, you know,
funny that.
Yeah, see our reading of Benedetta. But I think that I didn't grow up in a theist family. I kind of was left to my own devices, which meant that I studied all these religions as history and as sort of like, oh, what did people get out of this? And came at it from that perspective, meaning that most organized religion and theism is kind of astoundingly jarring to me, and still kind of tends to be the case when I don't know from the get-go that that's what it is. Like I think we talked again about the Verhoeven film about it having like that Catholic thing, right? Like that's not a thing that I intrinsically get. I have to like sort of like work to understand it just based on my background for it. But I think it's interesting that if you think about, again, historically where everything was at, I also think it's cool that it's not explicitly clear what time this movie takes place in. It could be like post-apocalyptic. It could be like the same year that it was made. Like it's very kind of out of time in that way. And I think that's one of the things that if you think about what the Stalker is and what he does and why it would be important for him to have, you know, faith, whether it's like, you know, theist faith, whether it's, faith in like just something greater than himself, and why it would be important for this thing that he not only is devoted his life to, but it's actively shortening his life by doing it.
Yeah,
let's be clear, because that's the whole interaction with his wife in the beginning, right? Where it's like, hey,
and his kid's
going out again,
mutated by it. His kid, like it's gotten into him so much that the kid actually,
psychokinetic, telekinetic.
That scene at the end where you see her
Surprise.
do this, I actually, the last time I talked about this movie, like spent an hour trying to figure out what is actually really being implied by that scene in the end when the kid is.
It's a sequel to. It's like a Stephen King prequel.
Yeah,
it's like the
longest intro to Carrie ever.
Right.
Well, I have a clip about the final scene.
I think that's because here's what I would say. There's enough of a mindfuck going on in here and enough of like a big vibe situation that you wouldn't need that. But when it throws that in at the end, you're like, whoa, what? But then if you think about what the zone is, and again, what the zone does to people and stuff, it actually completely makes sense. But it comes out of you seemingly out of left field because you're just like, I did not expect that.
Yeah, and the Stalker seems to have that power too because he blew out those light bulbs. Yes. And he's a mermaid. No, I'm just kidding.
You're doing so great, Andy.
Yeah.
История с поездом, финал Сталкера, где идет, приносится поезд, и слышим какие-то там знакомые вроде какие-то интонации под стуком колес. Там 9-я симфония звучит Бетховена, ну, такие шлягеры известные, как шлягеры симфонические. Что там, ну, я забыл, что выбирали. Сейчас не припомню, что составили список известных вещей, которые подсознательно обязательно сработают на человека, потому что все их слышали всегда по радио, они ежедневно играются. Вот. Я как раз спросил, для чего тебе надо? Ну, вот, ты знаешь, просто вот, такое ощущение, что да, такое и у меня тоже есть, когда идет или поэзия, или близко проносится поезд, какую-то музыку себя слышишь там, под этим грохотом, организованным еще этим ритмическим стуком колес. Я тоже ловил какую-то шоу, какую-то музыку, как в водопаде, если долго слушать, то начинаешь что-то выхватывать ухом, какие-то мелодические обороты воды и шумы. Вот это просто он хотел бы, никакого знака не имеет. Ну, не то, что это цивилизация, куда несется никуда, нет, просто такой странный такой эпизод, который работает. Потому что у каждого есть воспоминания, видимо, об этом звуке, и каждый чуть-чуть человек что-то там слышится.
That's intense. So the music that they were playing over that clip, though, that was from the music, the whatever that audio was. That was from the train trip into the zone, though, was it not? Am I misremembering that?
It sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But so they're talking about the end, though, as the
right with the ode to joy. Yeah.
And I used to think I was like crazy as a kid because I would hear like music and the sounds of like like rushing water, or I would hear music and the sounds of like a fan moving or something, and like sometimes like if I stared at it long enough, it would like kind of almost like transform into like this auditory thing. So like to hear them express that in like the sound of a train is kind of crazy. Or maybe I'm just getting the same brain rot.
For me, Stomp kind of ruined that, but yeah, I absolutely agree.
Hey, this is the second episode that we've invoked Stomp. I think we did briefly. Well, you weren't on the episode, but when we did Chicago.
Thankfully, yeah. But yeah. I mean, like, sound is a huge part of this film. Like, and I think the music in it is fantastic. It's like one of those things that I couldn't think of it being anything other than what it is. Really, too. Like, it's perfectly suited.
And it goes a lot with how Russia's kind of envisioned itself throughout history, right? Like as the point between. As the liminal space between Europe and Asia, right? So like kind of between these two worlds, sometimes acting as a hyper nationalist force where they're like, oh, we need to keep the Asian hordes out of Europe, but other times acting as kind of this ethnocentric belief that they've kind of created a special place for themselves, almost like a zone, you know what I mean, where like these two cultural fusions kind of come together. So, to have them actually explain that, like, oh, well, this East-West dichotomy, and he's studying Buddhism, which, I think a lot of people that actually were really into Christianity, like, hardcore Christianity, like my grandpa was, as like a spiritual thing. And like a lot of times people direct themselves, I think, towards Buddhism for parts of that, which is because it's kind of the most spiritual, I think, of religious philosophies rather than, religious, like theistic.
As a Buddhist, I might actually disagree with you on that, but I do think actually, particularly in the context of the Soviet Union, you have to remember that like the Buddhist world butts right up to it. Like, I mean, in fact, like certain kinds of Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhist communities were in the Tsarist Empire and were also in the Soviet Union. And there are religious practices specific to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, such as hesychasm, that look a lot more Buddhist than they do anything in the Catholic Church. And so that is something that gets picked up on by a lot, even a very, very conservative, very, very anti-eclectic Orthodox Christians, like, even like Father Seraphim Rose. And if you know anyone in the Father Seraphim Rose, you should run. They're reactionary. But he writes a lot about that kind of stuff too, and in the normal way that you'd expect it. It's like Buddhism is like this degenerate pagan form of this sincere spirituality, but you can learn this and this and this from it. Tarkovsky's interesting, in that way, because he's not. I don't want people to read him as a Orthodox Christian reactionary, even though he is Orthodox Christian. Like he's. If you watch his movies, he's not a prude, for one thing. and two, his vision of religion is a little bit bigger than just Orthodox dogma.
Even Stalker, you had the train orgasm at the beginning, so definitely not approved.
So it's, I think that's, to get into the film though. I mean, when he goes into the zone, there is so much going in there. One thing I like about that train soundtrack, between that and the color shift, it's both subtle and incredibly obvious, like how we are shifting worlds here. Like you get that rhythmic pattern, and then you get the splash of color, and you're like, okay, we're now on something different.
Exactly.
And the sepia sounds so amazing too, actually. But anyway, we've already talked about that.
It's gorgeous.
Like bringing kind of literature as art and literature as a force, right? Like as a spiritual force, but also as a very a possibly transcendent force, but also a very grounded, and like the speech that the writer gives, right, where he's like, I wanted to change the world, but they changed me, and I found myself changing to suit what they wanted, which kind of, it almost feels like there's so many Soviet writers, and that kind of, I feel like as the Soviet Union fell, the messaging changed, and so that as kind of a literary force, and then on top of that, the professor as the scientific, the ways that we kind of botch science, and whether we want to either capitalize on it for our own gain, or whether we want to exploit it, or whether we want to just destroy it because we don't.
Just blow it up. Just literally blow it up. Yeah.
It's kind of two pretty fascinating forces, I think, if you're looking at them in terms of allegorically, to bring into the zone.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tarkovsky, you see this in The Sacrifice, Rublev, and certainly with the writer here, he's concerned, or he's interested in exploring the role of the artist, we'll call him, the writer in this case, in society. And to me, that's what Rublev was all about. And that's one of the reasons that I found it so compelling. It's like, what is my role? What is my responsibility to my fellow person? And really, you get to go deep on that in this one with the persona of the writer. And I found it, I continue to find it fascinating.
Yeah, ultimately he's searching for inspiration and meaning, and kind of trying to re-articulate what it means for him to be a writer, to be an artist. And that's that there's certainly the idea of everyone coming to this place for their own needs and their own desires is unique, but I think that's one that's relatively timeless, right? I mean,
right.
Haven't we all been in that situation now and again, right?
Yeah, I do think it's interesting though, and Forrest, this goes back to your point earlier about being at on the at the very tail end of the Soviet Empire. Is that Tarkovsky is also interested in what is the creative person, the artist, the writer's responsibility to, the other people in society, his fellow man, for lack of a better term. You don't find Western European or North American directors or artists investigating that much because we don't feel like we have a responsibility to our fellow humans.
Yeah, I mean, it's a commodity, right? You're producing a commodity, everyone else consumes your commodity, and then, gives you money for it. That's kind of, rather than working to shape a society or working to create a larger project, which is something I think that did get grappled with in throughout the Soviet Union altogether. What should the role of, as they say in this, intelligentsia be? What should the role of the writer be? What should the role of the artist be? Is it just to continue propagandizing for the state, or is it to or is it a product for consumption? And I don't think we've ever really had that question, because we're no, it's just a product for consumption.
I'm going to push back on that.
Okay.
I think we view a lot of this stuff now through the post-1950s lens of American art, and I actually do think there was a pretty strong civic discussion about the role of artists in the early 20th century, partly because a lot of them were socialist, are fascist, frankly. But both of those people, either whether left or right, do have a communitarian ethos that is absent now. I
Norman
think
Rockwell, I guess, is one. That...
Yeah. I think when you look at, you know, I'm not big on the conspiracy theories about how extensive the CIA's propagation of abstract expressionism is, or their somewhat tangentious. Well, I shouldn't say conspiracy theories because it's true, but the effect of which it had on say the MFA program, because the money that the OSS/CIA actually donated that was somewhat scant, and they also funded people protesting it. It was actually pretty funny.
Yeah, but they did. I mean, they did fund Jackson Pollock, right? Like they have the
directly funded Jackson Pollock.
Yeah.
Iowa Writers Workshop as well. Wasn't that another beneficiary?
The reason why
Arthur
they did
Schlesinger, writing about like the history of all of this, like they were funding him and like the Nation at one point, and like.
Right. Well, I mean, if you deal with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, they were like funding everybody but like 5 people. And also people protesting those people. I mean, like the CIA OSS was giving money to everybody. I mean, including Gloria Steinem and William Buckley. I mean, like it's crazy what they're trying to do. But I do think, to give a little bit of credence to that, the 1950s and 60s after the Congress for Cultural Freedom is when you see art move from a public sentiment thing where an artist can make a some kind of money to, with Pollock and the abstract expressionists, to an investment mechanism, because that is what fine art is. And that's the shift we live in now. And then popular art, I mean, even so much as like proletarian art was hyper commodified at that point. That's also when you start seeing like the rise of patent law, really affecting stuff. I mean, it's not patent, it's writing credits, but you see like the ability to purchase other people's songs and hold on to them for way longer than you think should be possible, and stuff like that. That really happens in the 50s. I think when you read American artists discussing between like 1870 to about 1930, it's not like that at all. It does
You're
kind of
absolutely
mirror
right, Derek.
Yeah, the
post McCarthy stuff, I guess, is how I would revise my thesis.
Yeah, there's also the midbrow art that appeared in like Time magazine and whatnot, and with like Saturday Evening Post, going back to Norman Rockwell, who we learned recently about his homophobia in the 60s. But anyways, there was a whole like section of art for the people, and if you actually go back and look at like a lot of Pollock, for example, there's actually a famous Rockwell painting of a guy standing in front of a Pollock not getting it, and that's kind of a great example of like to me middlebrow art, and what we're also kind of missing, which yes it is commercialized, but like we kind of lost that when with the advent of like more television, the death of print, that kind of stuff.
Well, FDR's administration also funded a lot of different stuff as like kind of a state propaganda tool to sell the New Deal to people. And I remember I did a documentary about like a short documentary for Michael Brooks where we had Harvey Kay explaining the New Deal, for like an hour or whatever, and we cut it down to like a 12-minute documentary. And I remember like really being blown away by like archive.org and how many like films, like what like well shot I don't know what happened to Ian, but like well shot films that like FDR kind of made as like a state propaganda, or not him specifically, like funded as like a state propaganda tool to explain different programs to to the people.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is when you sit in the zone long enough, you disappear like Ian just did. So.
I think to final comment on that, we can transition back to the movie. But I do want to like talk a little bit about this, because in the FDR period there were communists involved because of the Popular Front. Now, ultimately, whole different podcast. You can hear me rant about the failures of the Popular Front another day. But one thing it did do is for example, the folk arts archive was really pushed by people who were more or less aligned with the CPUSA and the Democratic Coalition in the mid 40s. So that the people's art was recorded. And the other thing they did well into the 50s, and this is why like every black artist that you ever know, even when they became reactionary late in life, has some relationship to the CPUSA in the 50s, it's because they were literally the only people funding black arts. And one of the things that the IRA workshop and stuff was aimed to do, as far as like why the OSS was supporting it, was to move people out of these community arts groups. The most famous and later ones like the Beats, but you think about all the stuff in like Soho and Haight-Ashbury and all that stuff before that, going all the way back into the 19th century. They thought that was a hotbed for radicalism and for the leadership of socialist movements, and they wanted to get them into the academy. And then unfortunately, after the 60s, the leftists themselves went into the academy. Yep. Which is the only reason we associate college with the left, I think, honestly. And that's that's also why I think all this stuff feels very like, oh, we live in a neoliberal hellscape, and we always have. One of the interesting things about the early 20th century is that we were promoting this stuff both to work with, but also as an alternative to the Soviets. And once the Soviets, I mean, by the middle of the Cold War, like we don't really think the Soviets are a threat in the 60s unless they nuke us. So by that time, we're not trying to compete with them anymore. Like particularly after the space
makes
race.
It kind of clear after the after the Cuban Missile Crisis, like, oh, like I scared the shit out of myself here.
I think that's that's an interesting conundrum. Conversely, to turn it back to this, one thing you can say about the Soviet Union is it produced a lot of great artists, but it did underinvest in them in this time period in specific. It was one of the things that Tarkovsky would often complain about, sincerely. In fact, part of nostalgia's about this is that the Soviet Union wasn't trying to really push its vision of the world to the world in dialogue with it at all. And that's weird for a guy who's a crypto devout Orthodox Christian to say, but it seemed to be like he thought like, no, Russian culture, and he saw this as a Russian problem even more than a Soviet problem. Like he's like, Russian culture is too inward looking. We need to be in dialogue with the world. And he was very frustrated with the Soviet film industry because it wasn't, even though Soviet movies got sent to Cannes and blah blah blah. He did not feel like that the Soviet Union was really trying to even kind of compete ideologically and beyond maybe some sympathizers in Western Europe and in the Eastern Bloc. I mean, this was a problem he really had. So. This movie's interesting too because it didn't do well outside of the Soviet Union. So
he made us for somewhere between a million and 6 million. I guess.
Rubles.
Well,
probably rubles. I just to put a tag on the podcast that just occurred on this podcast is that as fascinating as all that is, like it's almost irrelevant to the film to a certain degree because the film is so good at drawing you into its world and its logic. And again, I'll go back to the extended game of Let's Pretend. And while there are visual cues for things, as the aforementioned, different cinematography, color tones, and even film stock, it's all done in a way that there's a very clear articulated purpose. And I think it's interesting that of the three people that are there, you've got like the professor, you got the writer, and you have the stalker, and they each kind of represent different facets of humanity and like different things that they may or may not be looking for. And it's given mostly as exposition, but when you hear about what's a porcupine is the name of the stalker beforehand, that like here's a cautionary tale. Here's a cautionary tale of how it could go badly for you. And as far as myth making goes, really, I think it's where that cements the purpose, cements the idea that it's being a science fiction movie, because it definitely has and in a way that like there's not laser guns shooting off, you know, there aren't UFOs flying around or anything, but it absolutely positively is beyond just like a vibe movie. Like it very firmly in the era of science fiction, but uniquely so in a way that a lot of movies would not have the ability to do, nor necessarily the interest, because the whole point of it is to just make this almost like extended liminal space painting that kind of evolves into other things, and to have the patience be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, what I guess they kind of explained to tie the two conversations together is that I think that it is uniquely Soviet, though, in the sense that, you know, there's a religiosity, obviously, to the idea of the Stalker, right? Like, but there's also like an ideological component to that of the Stalker, where, you know, the cautionary tale is that if you're chosen to be part of this realm, you can only, like, you can't enter the room. Like, you can't see what's actually inside of your essence, right? Like, you are meant.
You're the Moses. You can lead them up to the promised land, but you cannot enter. Yeah,
and for him to have discovered that, like, inside of himself, right, is just pure greed. I mean, I do think that it plays very, very, like, this time period, this moment in time for the Soviet Union, this you know, the decline of empire, like the kind of revealing to the people who they actually are. I think it is related to all of these questions about, you know, what is the purpose of all of this? What is the purpose of art? Like, what is the, you know, there's this conversation that goes on through, you know, the writer having with himself pretty much throughout the entire thing, with, you know, very, very, very rarely getting somebody to tell him to shut the fuck up, like the professor or something, where he's, you know, he's been, like, the people have failed him, kind of, you know what I mean? He feels like the people have changed him to shape him into them, rather than the writer getting any kind of, you know, changing the world. And it's this moment of non-belief for an entire society. And I just, you know, it's fascinating to me, because I think that, I mean, as Varn was saying, like, with, I mean, I guess things were a little bit different in the early 20th century, but, like, at least by the time of, like, Reagan and everything, like, there's no belief here. Like, the belief had been so far stripped in the U.S. empire, that we've gotten to this point where, like, it feels like there's never been any belief. And for Russia, I think when you actually, like, listen to people in Russia now, like, it seems the same way. Like, it's this neoliberal dystopia all around the fucking globe. Like,
end of history, baby.
Yeah, I mean, it's to tie into this a little bit. I think it's funny because one thing I love about Soviet cinema is it has a higher tolerance for slowness. But one of the interesting things about this movie is the official Soviet film critics actually chastised it for not being action-packed enough. So it wasn't just the West. It was like, this is too slow. I mean, particularly when you compare this movie, like, this movie comes out in 1979, and in the United States, what we think of as, like, the blockbuster is built, and like,
it's 2 years after Star Wars,
right? It's exactly. Star Wars. It's Jaws. It's all the early Spielberg films.
E.T., Close Encounters, yeah,
right. You know, and I mean, we can wax poetic about, like, the early 70s and that auteur cinema period, and there are problems with that too. But you kind of think, like, you know, I was like, why didn't this film do well in the West? Because some of the other Tarkovsky films did. In the art house circuit. This film didn't even do that well in the art house circuit when it actually came out. It did well in the Soviet Union. In fact, it seems to have been more popularly well received than actually critically well received, which is wild to think about when you watch this film now.
Yeah, what were those theaters like? Exactly, yeah.
It's like, so, like, the Soviet audience was really into slow, dull. I mean, and I say dull here because Tarkovsky actually deliberately wanted the beginning to be dull. Ponderous, long shots that require immense amount of attention that you're going to have to watch multiple times to understand. Like, in a time period before there are DVDs or even video tapes to really go back and rewatch something, like, that's a lot to ask of an audience. And apparently the Soviet audience was totally willing to pay it, even as the official critics at Goskino, which is sort of the official Soviet film guild. So Mosfilm's the producers, but Goskino was their, like, critics guild or whatever. And they did not like this movie. It's just funny to me because I'm like, I can't. I mean, I can imagine an American film exec saying the same thing Goskino did. This movie doesn't have enough action. It's too slow. And I want to tell you what Tarkovsky said in response to that. The film actually needs to be slower and duller at the start, so that the viewers who walk into the wrong theater have time to leave before the main action begins. Like, that's what
God damn it! Absolute king shit.
I just want to meet the Soviet guy who was like really stoked about this movie, like sitting there in the audience going, "Yeah, you sleep, you people, go sleep. Let that dog sniff you."
Oh man, it's so wild.
You think the reason that critics kind of panned it? I mean, it showed too much of the writer and like the superficiality of like writers and that kind of profession and who those people actually are. Whereas, if you're watching this as just a person in the audience, right, that's just like a normal not critic, you might be catching up on an ethos that you might feel yourself about, the lack of belief and wanting to believe in the system again. Whereas like the writer who watches this and is like, dude, you shit on writers for like 3 hours and talk about how superficial they are and like, how much they kind of just want like the life where there's like a lot of women and like they pretend to be tortured and like, but they really have no actual purpose. And, they've been commodified by everything. Like I could see being a writer being pissed off by this movie and be like, wait, what the fuck? Like, I don't want to hear that about myself. That probably hits too close to the core.
I get that, but that doesn't ring true for me because usually people like that, like, even if you're taking them to task, they're just so happy to have attention be paid that they'll be, even if you're criticizing them, you're talking about them, and so they'll be satisfied.
Well, I mean, there's definitely writers like that, but there's also writers that are so self-serious that like.
Fair enough.
Like, yeah.
I mean, the writer is probably the least sympathetic of the three main characters, but which I also find interesting with that little bit of trivia that I threw at you guys, that Tarkovsky's dad was a writer, a poet in specific, and actually a lot of his later movies about how much he loved his dad, but this one's like, oh, you're really coming down hard on writers, and I haven't found like what was prompting that. I do wonder if, I mean, like many things in Soviet films, like he's really just annoyed with other Soviet writers, and I do think there's a reason why we don't have a whole lot of like good Soviet literature from the 70s and 80s. Like, there's not a lot of it.
I mean, we do have the Strugatsky brothers.
Yeah, we do.
That was sort of like genre fiction. That was kind of pulpy.
Right. I mean, and you have Stanisław Lem, even though it's Polish. But again, both the Strugatsky brothers and Lem hate Tarkovsky's version of the movie. So, I mean, that's the funny. I think that the Strugatsky brothers are more ambivalent. Lem hated Solaris.
That rules.
So I find
that
that
makes me like the movie much more, actually.
Yeah.
Well, there's also Zalewski, right? I mean, like, just for on the Silver Globe alone, which he didn't really get done as much as he finished up what he could with it, and that came out in '88. But look at like Possession. I mean, there's a lot of like great filmmaking around that time period. But hey, how have we gone this far and not talked about the dog?
All right,
we gotta talk about the dog. This is Hound Narration.
I brought up the dog.
We did talk about the dog in the beginning. I said it was an Estonian dog, but this is
that's not discussion. That's an aside.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this guy's name. This is the second AD or the second cinematographer / AD they hired to talking about the dog.
We call him Lumpy. Hey, Lumpy, tell us about the dog.
Вся картина снималась в режиме. Там была построена огромнейшая эстакада такая. И выставляли, так сказать, актеры по миллиметру. Так, как голова повернута, как руки, как ноги, как что-то. И они приезжали на этой самой колясочке туда. Помните? На дрезине, да. И пока, вот, так сказать, мы выезжали, да, часов 12, а сам кадр снимался по сотам, не знаю, часов 8 вечера. Поэтому еще, так сказать, все не измучены. Поэтому все еще свеженькие. К 8 часам они уже да, уже несколько подустали. Это Это с водой что-то.
Ну, я говорю, значит, это
ТЭЦ заброшен.
что-то ТЭЦ, там дырки проливаются.
То есть там все вот это, вот что там текло,
Это все на самом деле, да, значит, нет, ну там что-то перекрывали иногда, так сказать, по кадру, так сказать, потом опять даже поднимали уровень, там как-то, я не знаю, там
возились.
Да. Мы выходили из воды по грудь, по колено. Все было в воде. Самое замечательное, что у нас была собака там, как ее звали, забыл, которую нашли в Таллине, эстонская собака, которая понимала только команду, только на эстонском языке. Потом нам надо было снять в Москве, там еще где-то. Привез в владелец, замечательную собаку. Потому что она, кроме как своей хозяйки, ничего не хотела слушать. Собака была ума какого-то невероятного. Был эпизод, помните, где Кайдановский лежит в воде, там над ней проезжает эта панорама, там и собака просто чудеса какие-то творила. Вот куда бы ей сказали лечь, туда, так сказать, собака ложилась. Потрясающе было. Главное, что там вода кругом говорили, вот здесь вот ляг, и она туда ложилась. Как же ее звали, черт, фантастично, фантастическое, самое полное.
Это что, Доберман был?
Нет, это овчарка. Немецкая.
German Shepherd, Estonian Shepherd. What's the difference?
It's a good boy. That's the important thing.
Yeah,
I
no
love
good
that
boy.
it's just such a, and there was a dog, and the dog is now in the film. Great. Why wouldn't you? Yeah, of course. Considering that, like,
We gotta cast
no
that
women
dog.
were allowed in the zone, so the dog is. Anyway, sorry.
We gotta cast
Forrest.
that dog, kid.
Forrest, sorry, was that the was that from that doc that you were talking about earlier? Is that the original
so
cinematographer?
That used to be his like kind of last interview that he gives. He seems pretty sick, but he's
Kind of gnarly.
So he's like the last one out of like the 7 of them. There's a picture of like 7 people that work on the film. He's the last one that's alive in like 1996.
That's
well,
grim.
then you see the image of like the guy lying down with his face in water, and you're like, well, yeah, that
Just sucking down those PCBs by the ppm.
Right, exactly. Just inhaling them. Yeah.
Gnarly.
Woof.
So, hey, you guys were talking about liminal spaces before, and there was a film that came out a couple of years ago based on a book that I absolutely loved. It's the Alex Garland film Annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
Which I have always thought the book and the film obviously owe huge debts to Stalker. I loved the Southern Reach books. I especially loved Annihilation, but I'm wondering if anybody has thoughts about Stalker versus Annihilation and the long sort of trail that it's had on Hollywood films or Western films in general.
I was actually thinking about this today coming in. I was like, what movies have Stalker influenced? And I was like, Annihilation and then Star Trek Generations. But which is a weird argument to make, but I'm actually sincere about that. Like, so, the Nexus is totally a Solaris ripoff. But the stuff about zones and weird zones and liminal spaces is also pure Stalker and Solaris. But with Annihilation, I think that what's interesting is the
God damn it, Ross.
Ross. First of all, secondly, how dare you?
Yeah, what's interesting is in Annihilation, there's a lot more with like, what does it mean to be transformed into something outside yourself and not know it, which is not a part of this movie.
True.
But I do think it picks up some of the same, concepts with the zone and the zone altering you in a key way, and what the implications of that are. The Alex Garland film, Annihilation, I really like. However, I kind of wish that they would make the other books in the Southern Reach, because it really changes the movie to know where that goes.
Yeah, I think they kind of didn't they kind of hamstring themselves by sort of bolting on the end of the trilogy to the end of Annihilation. Like, I don't know where you go from there.
Yeah, they kind of jumped to the very end, just be like, okay, we're done. And I'm like, but you're not done. Like, there's a whole lot you need. But it's, and, I normally defend, I think Garland is a pretty great filmmaker as far as like watchable semi-avant-garde movies go. I mean, he's always been in that kind of interesting space of popular directors who are clearly okay with art house stuff.
Yeah, it's never boring with him, for
right.
Sure.
Yeah. But I think about this because I was thinking about like, well, okay, what else does this movie influenced? And I say surprisingly not a lot. I mean, despite its key, I mean, like even though we talked about how ambivalent it was received both in the West and in Moscow when it came out, it's with critical concern. Almost everybody agrees it's one of the best movies ever made now.
In retrospect.
Yeah, in retrospect. And yet when I like think about like where does this show up, even as like, I can watch popular movies and find all kinds of like Kubrick references where someone's just literally ripping off a scene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't find that with Tarkovsky movies, actually. There's not a whole lot of people even trying to mimic him. Like and I think that's part of why
nobody wants to get into the fucking toxic water anymore.
That's true. Fair. I mean, but you could CGI that toxic water now. But it is interesting when I think about that. When I think about like compare him to like the person he wanted to compare himself to, which is Ingmar Bergman. I see Bergman all over the place in film signatures, and yet I don't see Tarkovsky much. Like, I don't think many people try to like mimic him at all. And the Alex Garland film is interesting to bring that up, because if it's mimicking Tarkovsky, it's because Jeff Vandermeer is, not because Alex Garland is.
Totally agree with that. Yeah, that's straight out of the source material.
Right. Like,
and that zone, I think it's interesting and sort of maybe not uniquely American, but distinctly American, in that it is an environmental horror story.
Yeah, it's like Cronenberg's body horror. That's environmental horror.
Yeah,
and if I may, just because I saw Annihilation finally like 6 weeks ago, so it's like pretty fresh in my mind. And I remember one of the things I said at the end of it was like, "Wow, there's a lot of movies that do an Aliens, some more that even like fewer still that will do like an Abyss, but like I can say both of those things very convincingly, and then also Stalker. Like, and I think, and I've never read these books." So I can't say for sure. Apparently you fellas have, but I thought it was genuinely unique and interesting because of that. Because again, Varn, as you were saying, like as influential and well regarded of a movie as it is, the influence seems to be like, tacit. There isn't like a lot of stuff like on screen for it. And that's the first movie I've ever seen where I'm like, wow, this kind of feels like that Tarkovsky movie. Like, and it's an action movie, and there's like, all these women ran around with like guns, like blasting weird creatures too. And it's like, this is like a culmination of many things that I like put together. It's great.
How much do you think is our distractibility though now? You know what I mean? Like it feels like things need to be action packed, and like a kind of 3-hour deliberate, any kind of homage to that, right? Like when nothing really, throughout this movie, a lot happens like character conflict wise, but not a lot happens action wise. It does seem like we've moved far away from whatever Tarkovsky was trying to.
But what I would also say is look at slow TV, right?
Yeah,
it does exist. It's in different formats.
You know what the difference is, though. I think Conan is slow TV is made for one media market, and big budget movies are made to play in every media market on Earth now. Yep. And so the context and patience has to be minimal.
Yeah.
And
don't bore us. Get to the chorus.
Yeah, and so I wonder, because I was thinking about that too, because I was like, is it that if you mimicked what is uniquely Tarkovsky now, not only would it seem obvious because like there's not many filmmakers who do what he does, like
I got
Bergman's
Criterion
literally-
Channel too, bro. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But also it wouldn't. I mean, it's hard to imagine the kind of like asking modern editors to be like, we're gonna make a 3-hour movie, and there's gonna be the plot I can summarize in a paragraph,
Right.
but you really need to pay attention to all of it. Because if you don't pay attention to all of it, you're not going to understand it. Not because you need to know the plot, because that's not really the important thing you need to pay attention to. Like, that's a real hard sell, like, to a movie. I think you could get it. I mean, what's weird is I think if you were going to see it now, it would be on TV. It'd be some weird, like, experimental television one-off.
Yeah, I would say there was a TV show that just got canceled that kind of comes close, Debris, which I loved that one season. That we got of that show. It was like the X-Files, but more meditative and like this. The ending of the season was great too. It just wondered where it was going to go, and we'll never know. But
well, back in Days of Yore, that probably would have been a movie, right? That's how we like talk about like things that are very long, like have they be like serialized, episodic, prestige TV, or whatever we call all the various thousands of streaming services that people look at things on, right?
Yeah,
I find limited series interesting for that reason, right? Like you can put hours and hours of stuff that you would put into a movie into like a limited series, and kind of have a 6-hour rather than like a 2 or 3 hour.
Look at Twin Peaks: The Return. Like I'm so glad I didn't try to do it as a movie. That like there's no way. Yeah.
When you were talking about that, Forrest, the British Utopia instantly came to mind. One of the best like limited series.
So good.
I remember seeing incredible stuff.
So good.
And of course, the American version completely fucking screwed the pooch.
Yeah, they got it wrong in so many.
Every conceivable way they fucked it up.
Yeah. It was really disappointing. I think Ian was like only you and I that saw it, but I loved it.
Super good.
And also, but unfortunately, may have aged somewhat poorly due to the subject matter of the whole pandemic thing.
Yeah, the whole like QAnon thing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's interesting? I find interesting about this, both the book and the movie, though, is we're talking about the uniquely American concerns of annihilation and its concerns about the environment, but Stalker is weirdly actually concerned about the environment. That's part of what's driving the plot of this movie. And I was like, why would that be such a pressing issue in the Soviet Union? And then I thought about Azerbaijan. I was like, never mind. Of course, it's a pressing issue in the Soviet Union. Like, you got, like in some of the Central Asian and Eastern European like periphery areas of the Soviet Union, you had basically, they're filming in a very beautiful toxic waste dump apparently, but a toxic waste dump nonetheless. And so I wonder how much, like, that's an interesting theme in this movie because you can tell it's not Tarkovsky's main concern, but it's not something he feels like he needs to
clearly
remove. Yeah, it's
not personally anyway.
I mean, not to I know too soon, but like clearly it wasn't his main concern.
But it's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so I had one more clip I wanted to introduce into the record, and I think it's interesting to put it here.
Intro to the center record, yeah.
I always say that. I don't know. This is Tarkovsky talking about art and spirituality. And
that's because I'm wearing a black robe today. So
exactly, he's feeling very.
I say that like every episode. It's the first time anyone's said
I usually make the same joke. It's so funny.
Black robe and bisexual lighting. Let's watch it.
He's living that Benedetto life.
Я не умел отделить свою собственную жизнь от фильмов, которые я делаю. Для меня картины всегда были частью моей жизни вообще. Для того, чтобы сделать какую-то картину, мне приходилось всегда делать какой-то выбор жизненно необходимый, жизненно важный. То есть я знаю, что есть многие, кто умеет отделить свою жизнь от фильмов. Я знаю многих, которые в жизни делают одно в своих фильмах, они говорят совершенно о другом, выдвигают какие-то другие идеи, высказывают другие новые совершенно идеи. То есть каким-то образом у них уживается их совесть с теми мыслями, которые они выражают в своих фильмах. Я как-то не умел никогда это... И для меня кино это не профессия, это моя жизнь. И каждый фильм для меня это поступок. Мне кажется, что для того, чтобы строить любую концепцию, в частности, взгляд на искусство, следует прежде всего ответить на другой вопрос, гораздо более важный и общий. Вообще, зачем человек живет? В чем смысл человеческого существования? Использовать наше пребывание здесь, на Земле, для того, чтобы духовно возвыситься. Это означает, что искусство должно наше служить, так сказать, для этого. Если бы, скажем, я избрал другой принцип и смысл жизни для себя, очевидно, искусство для меня выглядело бы в другом смысле, и я бы должен был изобрести что-то другое. Не знаю, была такая точка зрения, что искусство таким же образом познавательно, как и вся остальная человеческая интеллектуальная и духовная деятельность на планете. Я вообще не слишком верю в возможность познания. Знание нас все более и более отвлекает от главной цели, от главной мысли по поводу нашего знания о мире. То есть чем больше мы знаем, тем меньше мы знаем о нем, потому что мы углубляемся и тем самым лишаемся возможности глядеть широко на то, что мы называем жизнью и миром. Искусство служит человеку для того, чтобы помочь ему, так сказать, духовно воспарить, возвыситься над самим собой, используя то, что мы называем свободой воли.
Put that on my tombstone. Knowledge leads us away from knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, right? Like there's a a deep, fundamental, I guess, truth that the more that we know, the deeper we get into things, and then maybe we get farther away from that inner truth that But he said a lot there in that 3-minute clip, and no one's gonna be able to hear it in the audio version or understand it.
Yeah, so unless they understand Russian,
in which case they're stoked.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was actually thinking about obnoxious trends in writing right now, and I'm like, no one's ever talked about this as a rant against the PMC. But anyway, that's a very obnoxious trend. But it is interesting.
It is a rant against the PMC though. Like he's like, yo, this is a scientist and a white collar scientist and a fucking writer. Like, yes. What's more PMC than let the PMC into the zone, bro? You can't do that.
Right. Well, what's interesting about this is I think is the difference between the professor and the writer. And I want to throw that out to you guys because I have my own thoughts about that, but we haven't really talked about what do you think these character types represent, because they are definitely character types. Like they're all, explicitly almost allegorical. Why is the professor just randomly carrying around a 20 kiloton bomb?
Average Tuesday,
Have you ever taught college?
Fair enough. I have taught college, and yes, but there happened times when I was in university that I thought maybe blowing up the world may have been worth it. But
Well, I mean, the center of science fiction a lot of times there is questions about when we make a new discovery, right? Like, what is this discovery leading us towards? What are the implications of this? And it does seem like the Stalker is completely has been fully convinced ideologically, I guess, that the zone represents happiness. You go into the zone, you're happy. It seems like the professor, whatever experimentation they did with sending people in there, has learned the opposite lesson, that no, you don't, this doesn't bring you happiness. In fact, this is an incredibly dangerous, and no one's really being vetted. Like, they're not like, hey, can I see all the places you've been, and like, can I read your manifesto before I let you into the zone? Like, they're just kind of letting people in based on vibes. And
They're not means testing the zone.
It does seem to be like, a vibes approved methodology of letting people in for sure.
Right.
Like,
it's like, not that lady, but you can come
she
in.
sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, there's those deep questions of like, if there is a new discovery or something, do we just fully embrace it? Who do we let into that zone? And like, if it is damaging, right? Like, if you go in there as as Hitler, like kind of as they said, right? Like, Führers of all types, which is kind of a funny statement. Like, I just imagine like a bunch of Hitlers walking in there, but like
all kinds of Führers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bunch of
one
Hitlers
of like
walking to the
sandals
zone.
and shorts.
So a bunch of Hitlers walking to a bar. No, like, so like, if people do have designs that what they want most of the world is world conquest or domination, like the professor seems to be asking those ethical questions, whereas everybody else has kind of just decided like, no, we're gonna liberate ourselves through this. We're all gonna be happy after letting everybody into the zone. And it does seem to be that kind of moralistic question or that ethical question that goes into
right.
like even like Jurassic Park, like that kind of thing. Like we have this now, but should we? But should we have it?
Right. Well, I mean, this is my whole point with the comparison to Generations. Actually, this is a weird Star Trek sidebar, but I'll tie it back.
I'm glad I'm not doing this bit. So
yeah, but I think Generations does rip this movie off because what the Nexus gives you in that stupid movie is everything you want, and then you discover that what you wanted is actually probably some secret regret you have in your life, and that has some kind of profound turning point on you. Now, Generations does this stupidly, but that's the crux of this film, is in that backstory with Porcupine, because when faced with what Porcupine actually wants versus what he thinks he actually wants, the realization of that causes him to commit suicide. And that's all the backstory. And that looms further and further. Like, as you get closer and closer, you go through the weird tunnels and you're like seemingly walking upside down. And like, you get to this end point in this tiny little room where it also looks like it's nuclear winter and there's a phone ringing for no reason.
Which I really want to discuss that, but yeah, please continue.
The phone ringing for no reason. But you get into this room, and yet they don't go in, because that haunting thing with Porcupine really starts to hit them the closer and closer they get. And the professor decides not to destroy the room and everybody else, but then they also don't take the leap into what that room would mean, like, because there's this implication where the professor's not wrong. If you get confronted with your true desire, you may not like who you are. And that element of this movie, I think, is fascinating, and it's such an interesting idea to think about. Like why would it be given ultimate happiness be the thing that would like completely destroy you? Like, why is that?
In the case of Porcupine, I think that the story is clearly that he thought of himself as like this selfless person that was gonna like bring his brother back. And then they're like, nah, you just want to get rich like everybody else.
You just want to get paid. Yeah.
Yeah. And like that hollowness of realizing, I think that like, number one, you're not going to get your brother back. Number two, like, yeah, you're rich, but like, what can you really do with that money now? Like, I think that it does kind of destroy you. And for this to kind of be taking place during the time when, the empire is crumbling and everyone is, he seems obsessed throughout this movie with pointing out that everyone's gobbling things up, consuming. They only care about wealth, like that's pervading the entire space. And they're no longer believing in basic values. They're no longer believing in anything but the fact that consumption is the one thing we can really control. I think that it is clear that could destroy you within that. Like,
that's interesting. Do you think? I've gone back and forth on this, and I just want to throw this to the Stalker fans. Is he saying that about the world in general, or is he saying that about the Soviet Union? Because I think what I think is interesting is I think the Soviet film critics think he's saying that about the world in general, but I think he's saying it about the Soviet Union. And
I think he's saying it about the Soviet Union, because I don't think that spark exists outside of like other places. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there is a belief in kind of doctrinaire Marxism that teaches about the collective spirit, and actually, would reject that kind of individualist mentality, for you to realize that, everything is kind of hollow within this, and it's no different than anything else. And for that to be the thing that causes everything to self-destruct, I think that only could be about the Soviet Union, right? Like, I don't think, like, because like if you're looking at like the U.S., or if you're looking at like Western Europe, like we're not pondering these questions. We're like, no, like obviously the money. That's what.
Yeah,
that's
particularly
what,
in this time period, right?
Yeah.
Like from like late 70s up through the 80s is the time period where we're like, yeah, Martin Scorsese, being a good Catholic, is trying to convince us his greed is bad, but we all watch Wall Street and really like Gordon Gekko.
Like what brother? What brother died in the meat grinder? I don't.
Yeah,
I had a brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Real Thatcher hours too. Right.
Yeah,
about
I mean, yeah. So I mean, it's interesting to think about, like, because I do think this movie resonates with us now because like consumptive cynicism is where we're at. I mean, we can call it capitalist realism, call it whatever, but we live in a very like I teach kids and they don't think there's a future, and that does feel like the way people describe the end of the Soviet Union, like
and how they describe the end of the Soviet Union within this movie, right? Like the future is the present. Like it is that nonstop grinding down of everything that just kind of keeps going and going, and like for them to kind of confront each other over hope, and for him to be like, why are you trying to kill my hope? And for him not to, like, you know, the professor not understanding that it's like hope, and the writer too, and just being cynical about the whole thing, right? Like this is a destructive force. There is no hope here. And for the one kind of pure, almost like religious or like theological character, I think, you know, being the Stalker, like he really just does want to lead them to there's a room to like give them everything they want, and like, you know, his one purpose.
He's a believer.
Yeah. So like for them to try to snatch that away from him, I do think that is it's definitely a message about like the Soviet Union. It's also a message about that we're in now. Like kind of, I think like I don't think anybody has any hope. I think we're all just like the writer.
Yeah, let's. I want to ask you guys, what do you think about? Because I've thought a lot about this too. Why does this movie, which is essentially a womanless movie, except for the beginning and ending, and in the beginning and the ending in particular, I think we're supposed to think that maybe the wife is actually the person who's the most correct, but it's ambiguous. Like
you're talking about the little soliloquy she gives at the end, like directed towards the camera. I mean, like look at it from the perspective of what's one of the first things you see, right? Like the camera's going into a room. It's like the audience is itself going into the room that's going into the zone, and in that same way, it would make sense for her to be addressing the audience, you know, and looking at things like from a, you know, breaking the fourth wall or whatever kind of situation. But also, like, I just think it's just bookending the beginning to a certain degree. Like Stalker knows that like it's doing himself and his family harm to do this, but he is a believer, and the power of belief is so all-encompassing that it will cause you to sacrifice everything else in a lot of cases. And there's a lot of, you know, there's arguments to be made that that's a positive attribute, and arguments to say that that's, you know, you're gonna wreck your ship on the rocks with it. But
and the wife goes to great pains to let us know, the audience, directly that she was okay with it. My mom wanted me to ditch you, but you know, they told me I heard all the warnings. I went into this with, you know, open eyes, and I don't regret it. I never have, but it's better to have loved and lost kind of thing. Like better to have an eventful life than just a drab, boring one.
Yeah,
I mean, it also feels like they're almost in heaven, or you know, some kind of spiritual realm at the end too. Like it feels like they're the parent, like the parents are part of some kind of almost like bureaucracy of angelic forces or whatever, being like, no, this is the guy that actually believes that like all this shit is like, you don't want to be with that guy. Like that guy's just gonna drive himself into the fucking zone in the end of it. Like you want to be with someone who's like cynical. So that cynicism even goes as far as whatever force I guess is out there that you want to say that they're associated with.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is the very last scene is the daughter, and we talked a little bit about the psychokinesis part of that. The other thing that's interesting about that scene is the daughter is reciting a Fyodor Tolkiev poem, and poetry shows up in Tarkovsky's movies all the time. I talked about that a little bit, and his dad's a poet. And like you get the feeling that like, yeah, he thinks writers are full of shit, but maybe poets are okay. But that it ends on that, and that last scene is so ambiguous. It's both beautiful but really kind of disturbing. And then when you think about the content of that love poem being read at the same time, it's very unsettling. Like and you kind of half wonder. I mean, this is me completely going off script, but I'm like, what's the daughter representing? Is the daughter like representing what he wanted from the room? Like, what's going on there? I mean, he didn't go into the room, at least not that we saw, but what is going on with that last scene? Because that I mean, last time I discussed this movie, I spent an hour just trying to figure out what exactly is meant by that. You know, you have the tired stalker comes home from all this after going back to the bar, collapses, his wife does the monologue to the screen, and then we get this weird scene with the daughter, and it seems like the way the movie's shaped, these are all of a lot of import, but they're also not explained. Like, I mean, I guess the monologue directly into the screen is pretty explanatory, but the last scene is absolutely not. Like,
I mean, is that kind of the hope kind of springing eternal, right? Like, he seems to be dying off, and the daughter is left with kind of the powers of like hope and the, you know, the power she got from the zone itself, and like that, it kind of feels like it's almost like a coda to it, right? Like, it at the end of it, they're like, well, you know, hope still exists in the form of this mutated girl, but like, you know, it's dying away from the father.
Yeah, and it's also smashing a glass. Like, so it's hopeful, but there is a slight ominousness to it at the same time. And that's a very hard, I mean, like, just as a writer, you know, I'm a poet, and that kind of emotional resonance, like, is really hard to capture, and it's really hard to capture in film too. Honestly, I think film's a little bit easier, but you know, there's almost a negative capacity about the end of this movie where, like, you're being given hope, but in a fairly hopeless seeming situation, particularly when you look at how drab the non-zone world is depicted, and it's portrayed as like ultimately like the sacrifices are worth it, and there's something born out of it that's really worth it, but there may be an edge to that too. And I don't know. I think that's a very fascinating sentiment to leave on, particularly after you spent so much time with these three kind of archetypical, you know, the writer, the professor, and the stalker. And that's an interesting thing to think about, because this doesn't ultimately end up being really about the writer or the professor's journey, even though they're both profoundly changed by it. It's actually about like the stalker's journey and his family. So that's something that I just puzzle about, you know, given the asymmetry of screen time and whatnot.
Yeah,
this was an American movie. We got the backstory and it obnoxiously, and it'd been like 25 minutes about the family and
tons of flashbacks, you know, jump cuts. Great, yeah. Ian, how do you feel about it? I think that's a very interesting topic.
How do I feel about? Oh, what happened? We lost somebody.
No,
we
Forrest.
lost Forrest.
Don't worry about it.
Cool.
it's fine.
Yeah, the sort of asymmetry of the gender thing. I don't know. I think it's profound that Tarkovsky does give two female characters the last word.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of, you know, is this going to pass the Bechdel test? No. But it does. You know, it was a very different time. Two, you know, I feel like at least he's making an overture toward, you know, trying to include some female, a female voice and then a female face. I don't know. I can, you know, to me, really what stands out, like I'm totally with Varn about like deconstructing that last scene. Like, what the fuck is it trying to say? But mostly I'm just like wrapped by looking at that child's face. Like the way Tarkovsky shoots, frames, heads is like revelatory to me. I could watch, you know, if you just watch any of his movies, the way he shoots faces, heads mostly, is unique and sort of awe-inspiring. So just like looking at I have a GIF saved of the kid, you know, monkey moving that glass. Like it's on my desktop. I watch it all the time, just like the, you know, 1.5 second loop of it. It's remarkable. Like, and that's like, there are a couple of images. It's, you know, the crazy, once they get into the zone, those sand dunes, whatever, with the bird flying across. One image. Second image, the stalker laying down in the water with the dog, and then the third image, monkey with their head on the kitchen table. Like those are the three things that I remember, about this movie. And so the fact that she's on screen for less than 5 minutes total in the movie and still, reaches the pinnacle for me is super intense. And him carrying her away from the bar on his shoulders, and that just really grim exterior shot with the nuclear power plant in the background, man. I that hit me very differently this time watching it than any other time. Just like the reality that they're living in, both the people in the film and probably the people at the end of the Soviet experiment. Man, that looks fucking grim.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Looks a bit like Detroit to me, but
Yes.
Well, but it's also about to get a lot. I mean, the thing is, what we all know, because we have the unfortunate hindsight of history, that it's about to get a lot grimmer.
The next 10 years not going to be great, guys. Next 30 years not going to
the next 10 years after that are going to be far worse. Because,
for real.
That's when they bring in the old Yeltsin shock.
Right, and like 1/5 of the male population just dies, and no one even notices. It's pretty crazy. I was actually thinking about that, the way Tarkovsky films faces, and it's weird because I can only to find analogs to that. You really have to go back to very early filmmakers. Like the only other person who films faces like that is Karl Theodor Dreyer, the German filmmaker, and that's in the transition from silent to talking movies. So the face is doing a whole lot of substituting for.
That was 90% of the filmmaking was the face.
Right. Yeah, and that's what's interesting.
Italian filmmaking too during that period. I think there's some
look at Joan of Arc, right? Why is that a masterpiece? Well, have you seen it? Yeah, you'll know why exactly. It's all in the expressiveness.
So I want to say that's Karl Theodor Dreyer. I mean, he's really famous for 2 movies, Joan of Arc and Vampire, and that's pretty much it. And
I didn't know he did. Yes, then absolutely, because Joan of Arc is. It's astounding how little is actually happens in that, but it's all in the face.
Yeah. And I just love it. This period of cinema, particularly Tarkovsky, it makes me really sad that we don't really have this anymore. Because even now in the streaming era, where we're back to mid-budget movies are finally kind of being made again because they're being made for streaming. We still have kind of lost a lot of this sensibility. I know I'm going to sound like the old boomer here, but even though this is one of those shows where I'm not the oldest person, but it's interesting to think about that, because I really don't see stuff like this being made. I mean, Lynch, actually, you guys mentioned Lynch. Lynch is kind of like the only person who gets away with this kind of shit anymore.
There's that one episode of Twin Peaks: The Return where there's a 4-minute scene of some dude sweeping up, and people are losing their shit about it. And I was like, I love it.
It's really great. It's super fucking compelling somehow.
Somehow it makes it compelling.
I feel like also Twilight Zone, not the newer one, but the older Twilight Zone kind of got away with doing a lot of stuff like this too throughout its run, but in short form.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Conan, you wanted to talk about that phone. Let's talk about that phone.
What's up? What's up with the phone, everybody? I like that it works, first of all, and then there's a comedic moment where it's like, really? Yeah, that's what's the backstory there? I mean, think about where they're at, right? They're in this sort of liminal space, alternate universe, kind of 2 minute walk away from the Godhead, and here there's a phone. And what's your first response? Let's go pick it up. Oh, who's on the other end of this? Oh no.
Well, and that made me wonder, I think, if there was some kind of plot where he's like, oh, I found the bomb, it was hidden behind bunker 4 or whatever. So it seems like there might have been some kind of plot where the scientists who originally found this zone might have hidden something, and then decided at the last minute that this conspiracy shouldn't go through, and then they hit it, and then the guy's like, my favorite detail of this whole scene is when he's like, it's because I slept with your wife 20 years ago, and this is your revenge. And that's just such an odd detail to throw into this, there's personal drama between these two characters. We never see the other one, but they do have some kind of personal history. Oh, awesome, cool. Like, are we going to find out more about that? No. Okay.
Nope. no, you will not.
He seems to not have known that the guy slept with his wife too.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Amazing moment. Yeah. Yeah. I think it merits any more discussion than that, and the fact that an already like elongated movie with a lot of things to think about is one more like what was up with the phone? Like what?
Why is there a phone call? Why is it a wrong number? Who's calling the zone?
Who's calling the exactly? Did they get a digit wrong? Like what the?
Who put the phone there?
I was meaning to talk to a different professor in a different part of the zone.
Oh,
my bad, bro.
My bad. I was trying to call AutoZone.
Get in the zone, AutoZone. Do you want to do letterbox one-liners?
Forrest, I would love to. Letterbox is a place for film. It is a place where film lovers get to talk at, with, and to each other. Bottom-up democracy, not just the Siskel's and Eberts getting to have their say. Everyone gets to have their say. People talk about the movies they love, the movies that they didn't love, the movies that they find as sleep aids. Anything and everything, it's all there. Best expressed in the classic one-liner, work in your tight five, like Andy World with his brick wall at the stand-up club. These are the letterbox one-liners for Stalker. Let's roll them. That dog was really just vibing, though.
To be clear, everybody in this movie was just vibing, though.
Literally, yeah.
Even those birds, just vibing.
Yeah.
Just vibing.
Even that porcupine until he hung himself.
The
vibes were fucked.
The vibes were indeed. The whole movie is just what your grandpa describes. It was like traveling to school in his day.
And then
just there was a big room and they wouldn't let me bring a gun into it, and that would never happen today.
No, you can tell you bring a gun into school.
Yeah.
It's encouraged. 3 Slavs discover the real treasure was the existential crisis each found along the way.
Winner, we can stop now. We're not going to top that. That's amazing.
It's so good.
I mean, it is kind of a French story in that way, right? Like, I feel like the French had a lot of time to think about this kind of stuff too.
Oh yeah, under various occupations.
Are you kidding me? My dad's beeper went off during this.
Oh man.
Now here's a little story I'd like to tell about 3 bad brothers you know so well.
Oh boy.
Oh, that is the American remake, right? Is like Will Smith and Stalker.
The American remake is that they get to the center of the maze, and it's the Amazon fulfillment center.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then what's his face from The Room pops up. He's like, "Oh, hi, Mark."
Oh shit! I took both pills, and now I'm stuck at the threshold to the room.
Well, it's Matrix liminal spaces.
Yeah,
it is.
Gobble it up.
Imagine finding a working telephone in the middle of an abandoned factory.
That's Soviet infrastructure for you, man.
It's a rotary phone too.
It looks like crap, but it still works. Okay, Tarkovsky had 1 camera, a dream, and a ditch.
Fuck.
That didn't escalate quickly.
All right, I take it back. I said we weren't going to top the second one, and here we are. We've topped it.
I was waiting for the full 3 hours for something to happen.
Yeah, there's only 3 stars too.
Kramer, what's going on in here? The zone wants to be respected, otherwise it will punish Jerry.
I made that as a after reading this last night. I sent it to you. I made that as a meme and put the fucking zone in there. I should have used it for.
I was thinking of you when I
with
pulled
the Roy Rogers roasters red glare.
Roy Rogers roasters.
Kenny Rogers roasters. Sorry,
I like it better as Roy Rogers.
Totally.
3 men with very visible male pattern baldness talking about philosophical shit for 3 hours. Great movie.
1 star.
No, just a heart.
No, just a heart. No,
Oh, my bad.
It's a like. There's no stars, but it is liked.
All right. Apologies, Mikey Y.
Mikey by the 2 Y's. 2 Y's.
The
And
second
that
existential crisis from, I think.
Totally.
I was going to say the second Y is for value. Those are the letterbox one-liners for Stalker. Of course, please follow the show Moving Extravaganza on Letterbox. That is your host Forrest here. I am Conan Neutron. I'm all over that biz. You can come get me over there. J. Andrew World, watching all the weirdest stuff. And you can ask him why he's spending his time that way if you want. Or you can learn. You can learn, or you can say that smarky thing. Ian, you're on there. I know you mostly use it for the watch list feature, but what's your username on there? I never remember.
Man, I couldn't even tell you.
Fantastic.
It might be Teen Archer. Try that.
It is Teen Archer. I remember.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Varn, you are on Letterboxd as well. And I'm
I think
glad
you're mostly tracking movies, if I've noticed correctly. Not
Yeah,
really
I track everything I watch, and I will star it, but I don't actually generally do reviews.
Well, that's how I started, and I'm going to bid on a movie show about it, so watch out. Yeah, of course, as always, Letterboxd is a place for film. J. Andrew World, full bisexual lighting. Please take a
Oh, Ian has a soft stop, so I was going to let him do his final thoughts. He dipped out. All right, well, then. All right.
I guess we won't be plugging in.
Boiled away.
Anyways, if you are watching us right now on Twitch, and you can help us out greatly by subscribing, if you happen to have an Amazon Prime account.
Hold on.
Okay. If you happen to have an Amazon Prime, just let me go, dude.
All right, but he said he had a soft stop at 7, so
I know. So stop stopping me. Okay. Amazon Prime account. You can subscribe for free. That helps us out. Do that. YouTube. Do the YouTube things. Like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell, and a big ask here. Watch to the end of the video because that helps other film fans find our content. So, you like what you see here. Watch to the end. You get that great Conan Neutron song at the end. If you really want to not hear you just want to hear the beauty of the Russian language without the subtitles, this is available in podcast form where you can do that.
I think about that every time we do a foreign language film, which we do a lot of. But
yeah. But yeah, wherever you get your podcasts, we're probably there. If you can't find us, let us know, and we'll probably try to get out of there.
And we'll hassle Forrest about it.
Yes.
We also not on a Podbean, but I don't know how to do that. So
yeah, okay. But we have a Patreon, which is good. And whenever you join, you get to have access to all the after parties forever.
After party forever.
Yeah, I'm sick, so I can't really sing. I got my allergies going.
I'm exhausted, so I couldn't even think about what the lyrics are.
Are we?
It is all based on
an
something
after
I
party,
said.
by the way? Are we doing
I'm down.
All right.
I know Ian is, and Ian's barely sticking around to do his final thoughts.
Yeah.
Conan has stuff for you to get, such as his great new album, Dangerous Nomenclature, with a new music video coming soon. And
yes.
Protonic Reversal's on break this week, so I can't think of any Russian interviews that you've done, which is a shame because I would have loved to have you to have interviewed Alliance, the guy from Alliance before he passed.
You've never heard of Conan's famous interview with Putin?
It's a classic Protonic Reversal.
Oh, I missed that one. Okay. Check out Conan's interview with Putin.
Yeah, but episode 300 next week. I was too beat from tour. So
yes,
that's my excuse.
He also has a Patreon, so you can get the episodes early, usually like a day. And subscribe on YouTube for to Protonic Reversal because we want eyeballs on that stuff. Ian, are you going on tour soon?
No touring until September for me right now. What I've got to plug are basically just the Rigs of Dad podcast. It's a twice weekly podcast I do with Ross of Rigs of Dad. We have a Patreon, but the weekly episode is free for everybody. And we're just starting a sub program, a little short run show about the Bands on the Run VH1 reality series from 2001. So if that is your jam, check out Rigs of Dad on just about every social media platform.
I was just talking about that on the way back from this tour.
Outstanding.
I was shocked by how much detail I remembered from something that happened so long ago.
Yeah, it's complete. I'm watching it for the first time. It's completely blowing my mind. It has not aged well, folks, in case you were curious.
I love the David Cross bit about Harlow as well.
Oh, my God. Answer your telephone.
do you have final thoughts? Because I want to make sure that you get out of here on time.
I appreciate that. Final thoughts are, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I loved getting to chat about it with you guys, and I loved being compelled to watch it again. It's just so rich, like all of Tarkovsky's stuff. It's just so rich that every time you watch it, I'll use the first person. Every time I watch it, any of his stuff, I get more and more out of it, with the possible exception of Sacrifice and Solaris. The ones that I love, like the ones that I love, though, like Stalker, Rublev, Mirror. Every time I watch them, I get more and more and more out of it. And it had been a while since I'd seen this, so I was thrilled to watch it again and talk about it with some like-minded folks. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Varn, what do you got?
Yeah,
Varn,
who's coming up this week on your show?
God, I don't even know. Let's see. Probably Matt Cavagrodi is doing a part 2 discussing the history of the Federal Reserve. I have upcoming episodes with Stefan Hamill on Marx Class Consciousness. I have upcoming episodes. I have a bunch of episodes on art actually coming out, which is not something that my audience is used to, but the editor of Unlikely Stories magazine, who is my first publisher, did an episode with me. It'll come out probably in the next month. There's a episode I recorded today with Glenn McDorman of the Claytable Media group, who do podcasts on literature and specifically the work of Gene Wolfe, but also on like weird fiction like Jeff Vandermeer, who we mentioned earlier, and H.P. Lovecraft, if you're into early 20th century weird ass racist literature, and which I think is good for what it is. And I also have a book out. It's book poetry. It's not political analysis or whatever. And so that is Liberation and All the Bright, etc. It's going in for a second printing. Thank you guys for buying all of it. It's a poetry Myco press, so it's not hard to buy it out. But thank you guys for selling, I think, probably the 200 copies. So then I have to do another printing, and probably means I'll get to do a third book. And I recently wrote an article arguing indirectly with Ben Burgess about Bernie 2024 for Sublation Magazine. So that's what's out for me. So yeah, that's my plugs. And I feel like I'm on every show now somehow, like
including this one.
Yeah. I was on Left Reckoning this week. So if people want to check that out, I'd welcome the extra reviews over there, and so would David and Matt, I'm guessing.
They do good
All
work,
right.
so
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they've done a lot of good work. Do you have final thoughts on this movie?
This is one of my 4 favorite movies, and my 4 favorite movies are all equal in favoriteness. So it's, when I say it's my favorite, it's like, well, yeah, but it's also my other favorite is Ran, and my other favorite is a Bergman movie, and my other but I fucking love this movie, and I've watched it now 6 times, and I get something different from it every time. And even though I have to drink coffee beforehand, because I'm not gonna lie, the beginning is both fascinating, and yet also, if you're not prepared for it, you will go to sleep. And but it's such a rewarding movie. I also want to stand late Tarkovsky, because I think people are more familiar with early Tarkovsky up to this movie, but his last 3 movies are I haven't seen The Sacrifice, actually. That's the only Tarkovsky movie I haven't seen. But Mirror and Nostalgia, I think, are brilliant. And for those who think that Tarkovsky's sexist, I think they should go watch Mirror, because it's mostly about women, and it's very, very fascinating.
I didn't know you had Misham on your top 4, by the way. We totally would have invited you on for the episode. I conscripted Erica Stroud into doing it, which she loved it. But
I love that movie. That movie
Me too.
I mean, weird movie, but Paul Schrader writing a movie about a fascist Japanese gay man, but it's
yeah, exactly. Pretty bizarre.
Who was also a filmmaker. If you've ever want to watch some strange movies, watch his movies, because he made some. Patriotism, his most famous short story, is also a film that directed by him. And so, for kind of interesting movie if it is a little bit fascist-y. But yeah, Paul Schrader's movie version of that is brilliant.
It's incredible. Yeah,
it's an incredible movie.
I hard sold the entire crew on doing it. Like, we're doing it. It's gonna be this date.
It's so good. It's so, and I think
but everyone liked it. I mean,
I want to pull it up in the after. So somebody's Mishima letterbox went viral the other day that I thought was hilarious.
Okay, let's see.
Oh, really?
But I'll find it in the after party.
Okay.
But yeah, moving on to Conan. Final thoughts.
Yeah, look, this is a very compelling film. There's a lot to love with it. It's a masterclass in cinematography and patience. It's deeply philosophical and mysterious. I said earlier, it's kind of unclear when it takes place, and I love that. Like, is it an alternate reality? Is it some fantasy world? Is it post-apocalyptic? Is it just dudes vibing in the Soviet Union? It's never really addressed. It just is. And that's all you gotta know is there's a place that will grant you your innermost desire of your heart, and there's a guy that will take you there. Cool. I don't need to know anything else. Fantastic. So you got a tiny cast that does like a lot of heavy lifting and some ponderous long shots used to great effect. And as difficult as it is described, I mean, it does really seem like one of the greatest games of Let's Pretend ever. And the craziest thing is that it works. And as you see these guys kind of get closer to like their stated goal, you realize that there's more depth to all of them than they really let on. And, it's hard, as I mentioned with the writer, any artist, a lot of things the writer brings up are questions that any artist asks themselves all the time. So, this is a one-of-a-kind masterwork. And, if I'm going to talk any trash, it's a wee bit long, but it's good. And it's a great film to vibe to, but it's also just a great film in general.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, I've been procrastinating to watch this film because like it is a long, nearly 3 hours.
He's still watching it, actually. He's watching the other screen.
And it's I was still in the middle of a move, so it's like I'm so physically exhausted at the end of the day.
Want to watch a 3-hour ponderous movie where dudes fucking do the same shit for like.
But like it totally is worth it too. Like that's the thing. Despite all this, the everything that sounds like it's going against it, it is actually makes it worth it. And I know one thing that this movie got me thinking about, and I know Varn can back me up on this because we grew up like a half hour from each other. But the scenes of watching like nature taking back like the tanks, the cars, and stuff always reminded me of the kazoo in Georgia. How that's like ravaged parts of Georgia where like these farmhouses are like taken over by this plant. Almost like this weird horror story. And just seeing that was like the first thing I thought of was just the weird apocalyptic plant takeover in parts of Georgia. It's and the thing is that's not even what the movie's about. It just that setting was just so like you get lost in it, and the sound design, the hypnoticness of it, the rhythm of the silence, and there is rhythm to it. It all works in a way that that very few movies could ever hope to try to pull off.
Agreed. All right. Well, my final quote that I'm going to pull is, "This pipe is the worst part of the zone. It's called a meat grinder. How many people has it ground up?" Anyone want to vamp for a second? My screen just went weird.
That's true fact stated, I think, is what we'll say about that. Who amongst us?
Conan, can you pull us into the outro? My screen just went weird.
Sure, I can. Yes, absolutely. How do I do that?
Hold on. It's under the like where the media stuff is.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Of course. Okay.
Yeah, branding. I think it's
And then
called.
it's the one that's April intro.
Oh, okay. Hold on. So, yep. Like and subscribe, everybody. Yeah.